Pam Bondi entered the courtroom, confronting a judge who seemed to dismiss her presence. When she finished, his smirk had vanished, along with the defense's assurance. The imposing doors of the Hillsborough County Courthouse groaned as Pam Bondi made her entrance. She strode confidently, the sound of her heels echoing on the gleaming marble surface. The atmosphere was infused with the aroma of aged paper and lingering coffee. The well-known ambience of numerous legal struggles endured and triumphed. This situation, however, seemed distinct. The stakes were elevated, and the adversary, a powerful corporate behemoth facing allegations of deceitful conduct, had invested heavily in their defense. At the front of the courtroom, Judge Richard Calloway sat elevated on his bench, his gaze meticulously sifting through a substantial pile of documents. His expression was enigmatic, yet Pam noticed the faint quiver at the edge of his lips. A sly grin. She had encountered that expression previously. Delight, doubt, a hint of superiority typically reserved for lawyers who are either overly youthful or excessively driven for their own benefit. Pam was neither, yet she understood precisely how the judge perceived her. She settled into her place at the plaintiff's table, placing her leather-bound case file with care. Opposite her, the rival attorney, Charles Merritt, straightened his luxurious silk tie. In his late 50s, he was the type of individual who had crafted a career solely on his reputation, gliding through the legal world with a flair for courtroom drama and the backing of established wealth. He hardly looked her way before shifting his focus to the judge, radiating the confidence of someone who was already sure of winning. The courtroom door creaked open once more. The jury entered, a diverse group of men and women, their expressions revealing a blend of intrigue and indifference. Some readjusted their spectacles, while others fidgeted restlessly in their chairs. Pam carefully catalogued each one in her mind. She perceived more than mere faces. She observed individuals, narratives, prejudices, aspirations, uncertainties. The bailiff advanced, his tone unwavering. "Everyone, please stand." Judge Calloway cleared his throat, adjusting his robe with a deliberate motion. "Take a seat," he remarked, his voice relaxed, bordering on indifferent. He adjusted his papers once more, then glanced over the rim of his glasses. "Miss Bondi, I hope you are prepared to move forward." Pam gave a slight nod. "Indeed, Your Honor." The judge let out a breath through his nostrils, a trace of amusement escaping him. "Well, let's hope this doesn't devolve into a spectacle," he murmured quietly, just sufficiently for the courtroom microphone to pick it up. A handful of jurors shared glances with one another. Charles Merritt wore a sly grin. Pam remained unresponsive. She effortlessly opened her case file and retrieved her notes. She had faced this kind of doubt before in the courtroom, and it was clear it wouldn't be the last time. Yet, on this occasion, things would unfold in a new way. The judge was completely unaware of the impending events. Pam rose, her voice unwavering as she spoke to the court. "Your Honor, the matter before us today transcends mere legal formalities. It revolves around responsibility." Judge Calloway raised a hand, interrupting her before she could utter another word. His expression danced on the edge of amusement and impatience, suggesting he had already mapped out the course of this hearing in his mind. "Miss Bondi, let's take a moment to pause and reflect. This is a session for a preliminary motion, not a theatrical display." A soft murmur of laughter echoed gently in the courtroom. Pam maintained her poise. Across the aisle, Charles Merritt reclined in his chair, fixing his cuffs with a sly grin. He had stood in this very spot before, flanked by affluent corporations, effortlessly resolving issues with a blend of sophisticated language and strategic alliances. He felt confident that today would unfold just like any other. Pam intertwined her fingers behind her back. "Comprehended, Your Honor. Yet the evidence is clear and undeniable. The defendants deliberately deceived countless individuals, assuring them of services they never intended to deliver." Judge Calloway let out a sharp breath, rifling through a file. "That's quite a bold claim, Miss Bondi. I presume you can support that claim." Pam locked eyes with him. "I am capable and I shall proceed." The judge raised an eyebrow, clearly lacking enthusiasm. "All right, Let's begin by hearing from the defense, shall we? He shifted his gaze to Charles Merritt. Mr. Merritt, please share your insights with us. Merritt stood up, wearing a relaxed smile. Your Honor, this whole case relies more on feelings than on evidence. The financial institution I represent has adhered to all regulatory guidelines with great care. While it's regrettable that certain individuals may have felt deceived, it is not necessarily against the law. He took a moment to let the silence linger, then moved on, his voice flowing with a confident smoothness. This situation exemplifies a plaintiff's attempt to penalize a thriving company merely due to their dissatisfaction with the way business operates. What we have here is not fraud or deception, but rather a misunderstanding that has been blown out of proportion, leading to legal action. Judge Calloway considered Merritt's words thoughtfully, nodding slowly. With a quick look at Pam, he couldn't help but let out a soft laugh. Miss Bondi, are we truly going to squander the court's time on a mere misunderstanding? The comment hit hard, yet Pam remained unyielding. She allowed the silence to linger, compelling the courtroom to endure it. All eyes were on her, the jury, the clerks, even Merritt, each one poised in anticipation. With a measured serenity, she reached for a document from her file. There is no misunderstanding, Your Honor, she stated, approaching the judge's bench with purpose. Only proof. She set the document down before him. Judge Calloway adjusted his spectacles, his gaze meticulously combing through the document. His smirk diminished slightly. Pam pivoted to confront the jury. What Mr. Merritt refers to as a misunderstanding is, in fact, a recurring theme, a carefully orchestrated tactic designed to mislead customers into entering agreements they cannot comprehend, as comprehension was never the intention. She waved her hand toward another pile of documents on her desk. And I possess the evidence. The atmosphere in the room transformed. The atmosphere shifted. For the first time, Judge Calloway's expression transformed into something more formidable. Not laughter, not amusement, but rather a sense of familiarity. However, Pam still had more to say. Pam remained still as the silence deepened around her. She allowed the gravity of her final words to linger, granting everyone present a moment to process the significance of what had just unfolded. The judge, now completely absorbed, drummed his fingers on the armrest of his chair before casting a glance at Charles Merritt. Mr. Merritt, Judge Calloway began, clearing his throat, I trust you have a rationale for this? Merritt's confidence wavered for a brief moment before he adjusted his tie and let out a forced laugh. Your Honor, with all due respect, I struggle to understand how a single document is the focus here, as Pam was already in the process of reaching for another, not merely one. She returned to her table and retrieved a neatly bound stack of papers, the pages adorned with highlighted clauses and footnotes. There are more than 50 contracts present, all featuring nearly the same wording, deceiving clients into believing they were committing to low-risk investments, while in reality, they were consenting to conditions that could lead to severe financial distress. Merritt started to speak up, but she continued without pause. She turned to a page in the first document, positioned it for the jury's view, and began to read aloud. Section 14B indicates that the company maintains the authority to modify annual fees in accordance with anticipated market trends. That seems innocuous, doesn't it? In reality, the projected market trends are shaped internally, lacking any oversight, which enables the company to raise rates at will, often leaving the customer unaware until it's too late. She flipped the page. Section 22C states that customers who try to withdraw funds prematurely will face administrative penalties. The phrase is intentionally ambiguous, yet in truth those penalties surpass the value of their genuine investment, resulting in a complete loss. She flipped to the next page. Section 31A states that the company explicitly denies liability for market-driven losses. However, it neglects to acknowledge that my client's funds were never invested in the market in the first place. Instead, they were directed into high-risk private ventures that served the interests of executives while keeping customers uninformed. She placed the paper gently on the surface. This is not a matter of commerce. This is an act of stealing. The atmosphere was utterly still. For the first time, Judge Calloway's expression was devoid of amusement. He leaned in a bit, fingers intertwined. Pam confronted his gaze directly. Now, Your Honor, I'm more than willing to engage in a thorough discussion about the legal definitions of fraud and deceptive practices. But what I cannot permit is for my clients to be reduced to mere individuals who simply misinterpreted what they were signing. The sole misconception in this situation is the assumption that this company believed it could evade accountability indefinitely. Merritt shifted in his seat, his expression rigid. Your Honor, I respectfully request the dismissal of these claims. As Pam interjected, her tone steady. Your Honor, prior to Mr. Merritt proceeding, I would like to present an additional piece of evidence for consideration. She returned to her files and retrieved a single-page printout, an internal memo that had been leaked. She presented it to the bailiff, who then relayed it to Judge Calloway. He glanced over the initial lines, and his jaw noticeably clenched. Pam faced the jury once more. This document, sourced from a whistleblower, reveals that company executives were aware of these fraudulent practices for more than 5 years. It clearly directs employees to, and I quote, postpone disclosures for as long as legally permissible. Pam halted, observing the jury's faces intently. Revulsion, disbelief, and frustration. She faced Judge Calloway, her voice steady and resolute. Your Honor, this is not a case of misunderstanding. This is an organization that was fully aware of its actions and anticipated the legal framework to safeguard its interests. The judge let out a breath through his nostrils, his gaze fixed intently on the memo. The earlier smirk had vanished completely, yet Pam was far from done. A dense quiet enveloped the room, laden with the gravity of the recent revelation. The judge's gaze remained fixed on the memo, his fingers gripping the paper tightly, as if clinging to an unexpected revelation. For the first time that morning, Charles Merritt appeared genuinely disturbed. His typical calmness, the self-satisfied assurance, the seamless evasions had shattered. He cleared his throat, managing a strained smile. Your Honor, this purported memo is merely an unsubstantiated document. The validity of this is highly dubious, and even if it were genuine, it fails to serve as proof of any misconduct. We can't allow Pam to interrupt him. Your Honor, she interjected, her tone cutting. This document was acquired straight from a former employee of the defendant's firm. They not only validated its authenticity, but also shared email exchanges in which executives candidly talked about these deceptive strategies. She moved ahead, presenting a second file. Here are those emails, complete with dates, timestamps, and extracted straight from the internal servers. The bailiff approached Judge Calloway, presenting the file as the judge quickly glanced over the initial pages. His expression grew steely. Merritt sprang up from his seat. Objection noted, but this is dismissed. Judge Calloway interjected, his tone taking on a decisive edge. He placed the documents on the table, his gaze sharpening. Mr. Merritt, do you possess a legitimate legal argument? Or are you merely here to squander my time? Merritt's lips parted, yet silence enveloped the moment. Pam inhaled deeply, finding her composure. A transformation had occurred. The dynamics within the room had shifted dramatically. She faced the jury, her voice steady and resolute. For years, this company has concealed itself behind fine print and ambiguous language, fully aware that those signing these contracts lacked the legal knowledge to push back. They relied on uncertainty, on fear, and above all, on skepticism. She allowed that word to linger in the air, observing the subtle movements of the jurors as they adjusted in their seats. However, today that uncertainty has vanished as we now possess evidence. Evidence that they were fully aware of their actions. Evidence that their intentions were never rooted in genuine business, but rather in deceit. She faced the judge once more. And if this court permits them to evade accountability, then we are not merely letting down my clients. We are conveying to every corporation in America that they have the opportunity to follow suit, and that the legal system will remain indifferent. A whisper swept across the jury box. A woman seated in the front row, who had maintained a stoic demeanor throughout the hearing, subtly pressed her lips together and offered a nearly imperceptible nod. Pam possessed them. Judge Calloway tapped his fingers on the bench once more, this time with a measured, purposeful rhythm. He turned his gaze toward Merritt. What is your reaction to this evidence, Mr. Merritt? Is there anything specific? Merritt paused, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. His familiar maneuvers, his charisma, his deceptions, his refined performances in the courtroom had lost their effectiveness now. It was evident to all. The jury, the spectators, and even the court reporters had paused their typing, all eyes fixed on him, anticipating his reply. He gulped, straightened his tie. At last he resumed his seat. "No, Your Honor," he murmured. Judge Calloway reclined in his chair, observing him for a brief moment before redirecting his focus to Pam. His expression was not exactly admiration, yet it hovered near that sentiment. "Go ahead, Miss Bondi." The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Pam inhaled deeply, grounding herself as the judge's voice resonated through the hushed courtroom. "Go ahead, Miss Bondi." She had devoted years to courtrooms such as this, standing her ground against individuals like Charles Merritt, presiding judges like Calloway, and corporations that believed their wealth could shield them from accountability. But at this very moment, she transcended the role of a mere attorney presenting her argument. She was the sole individual in the room wielding complete command over the story. She was determined not to squander it. She faced the jury, her eyes unwavering. The next steps will be determined by the court. However, prior to reaching a conclusion, I urge you to grasp the true significance of the situation at hand. She waved her hand toward the rear of the room, indicating the group of clients who were seated there. Common individuals, many of them advanced in years, some displaying anxious faces, others clasping their hands firmly in their laps. She approached the jury box, her voice steady yet resolute. These represent more than mere figures on a spreadsheet. They are individuals who have seen their life savings vanish, parents who have taken on additional work merely to maintain their homes, and small business owners who placed their faith in a system that ultimately turned against them. Pam paused before the jury, softening her voice to a whisper that compelled them to lean closer to catch every word. The executives gathered in their polished boardrooms, sipping on gourmet coffee, contemplating the limits of their influence over the workforce before resistance emerged. They relied on quietude. They relied on fear. They relied on attorneys such as Charles Merritt to persuade courts like this one that deceit is merely a standard practice in the industry. She pivoted, locking eyes with Merritt's fierce gaze for just a fleeting moment before redirecting her attention to the judge once more. "Your Honor, the defense would like to suggest that this is merely a case of misunderstanding, asserting that my clients overlooked the fine print. However, the reality is that the fine print was crafted to ensnare them. It was a trap veiled in the guise of an agreement. As soon as the ink dried, the door banged closed." Pam retreated to the plaintiff's table, lingering briefly to let the impact of her words permeate the atmosphere. She set her hands firmly on the table, locking her gaze onto Judge Calloway. The pressing inquiry at this juncture is whether this court will permit them to evade accountability. Quietude, complete and unwavering stillness. For the first time, Calloway refrained from grasping his gavel. He refrained from making another joke. He refrained from smirking. He remained seated, gazing at the papers before him as though they were entirely new to his eyes. The jury remained still as well. Several individuals cast their gazes upon the contracts laid out before them. Others turned their attention to Pam's clients, their expressions transforming from doubt to something more intriguing, perhaps frustration, a feeling of obligation. Pam let out a soft breath. She had accomplished her purpose for being here. Then Judge Calloway addressed the room. "Mr. Merritt," he stated, his voice distinctly more weighted than it had been earlier. "Upon examining this evidence, I find no basis for dismissal." Merritt's expression hardened. "Your Honor, The judge gestured for silence. "Negative." His voice had taken on a more resolute tone. "Your client will respond to these claims during the full trial." He glanced over at Pam. "Your request to move forward is approved, Ms. Bondi." Pam remained expressionless, devoid of any triumph. She gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." Yet Charles Merritt was aware. The jury reached a conclusion as well. The gallery did as well. Pam Bondi had already secured victory before the conflict had even started. Judge Calloway leaned back in his chair, stroking his chin as if contemplating the gravity of his own decision. His earlier smirk had entirely disappeared, giving way to a weightier expression, one marked by reluctance. A judge who entered this hearing believing it to be a straightforward matter now faced the unsettling realization that he might have completely miscalculated the situation. Pam Bondi stood tall, her demeanor resolute. She had no need for validation. She had no intention of reveling in the occasion. She accomplished her goal, compelling the court to regard this case with the seriousness it deserved. In stark contrast, Charles Merritt had turned ashen. His fingers clutched the edges of his legal pad, knuckles pale, yet he understood there was nothing more to express. No more gaps to escape into. Enough with the legal tactics aimed at obscuring the truth beneath a mountain of documents. Judge Calloway exhaled deeply, then shifted his gaze to the court reporter. The court hereby notes that the defense's request for dismissal has been rejected. The case is set to move forward to trial. A soft whisper flowed through the gallery. Pam remained still, yet the sensation coursed through her. The atmosphere in the room had changed irrevocably. Judge Calloway turned his gaze toward her, and for the first time, his expression held no trace of condescension, no smirk, no amusement. Only the dawning awareness that he had misjudged her capabilities. And to make matters worse, he had allowed himself to be manipulated by the very individuals she was standing up against. He adjusted his robe, took a moment to clear his throat, and then addressed her with intention. "Miss Bondi," he murmured, his voice softer than it had been. "You've presented a strong argument today." Pam merely nodded. "That was the objective, Your Honor." After a brief moment of silence, Calloway cast a final glance at the documents before turning his attention to Charles Merritt. "I strongly advise your client to reconsider their position before trial," he said, his voice sharp with a newfound intensity. "From what I've observed today, I have a feeling they might not be pleased with the result." Merritt's jaw tightened. He understood the implications of that. His client may possess billions, yet wealth couldn't alter the truth. At that moment, the court was fully engaged. Pam turned to collect her files, her movements deliberate and polished. She found no cause for celebration just yet. This is merely the start. Yet, as she lifted her gaze, an unforeseen sight met her eyes. The judge offered a slight nod, neither an apology nor an admission, but rather a gesture of respect. Pam had compelled a system that frequently favored the influential to recognize that today it had encountered a worthy opponent. Pam Bondi exited the courtroom with the same unwavering confidence she had displayed upon entering. She moved steadily, without glancing over her shoulder. She had fulfilled her responsibilities, and now it was time for the system to take over. Outside, the atmosphere buzzed with the eager voices of reporters, ready to seize the moment. Several cameras illuminated the scene as reporters thrust their microphones toward her. "Miss Bondi, what are your thoughts on the ruling delivered today? What will you do next? Do you think the company will reach a settlement prior to the trial?" Pam maintained her speed without hesitation. This was not a time for press conferences or catchy phrases. Instead, she focused on her client standing at the courthouse steps, surrounded by individuals who had been overlooked, disregarded, and exploited for far too long. A woman in her 60s, clad in a worn blue cardigan, approached with a sense of uncertainty. Her voice held a gentle strength. "Are we looking at a possibility here?" Pam met her gaze and, for the first time that day, permitted herself a subtle smile. "Indeed," she replied with a straightforward tone, "you do." The woman covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes shimmering with a sense of relief. A handful of others expressed their gratitude in hushed tones, while some merely nodded, too moved to find their words. Pam was indifferent to the sound of clapping. She sought no acknowledgement. This was the reason behind her actions, to restore to people what had been taken from them. As she stood there, Charles Merritt stepped out of the courthouse, his typical self-assured demeanor now overshadowed by an unsettling chill. He averted his eyes, retrieving his phone as he made his way toward a sleek black town car. Pam was fully aware of the unfolding situation. His clients were calling in a frenzy, filled with anxiety, and gearing up for damage control. Judge Calloway's ruling may not have ensured a win, yet it conveyed a significant message. Eyes were upon them now. The mighty were not untouchable, and no degree of legal maneuvering could obliterate the truth for all time. Pam redirected her attention to her clients. "This is far from finished," she declared to them. "Not yet, but today you captured their attention, and that's where true transformation begins." The woman in the cardigan gave a slight nod, her hand clasping Pam's for a moment before she retreated into the throng of people. Pam cast a final glance at the courthouse, then let out a breath, her mind already turning to the tasks that lay before her. Justice transcended the notion of merely winning a single battle. It was about ensuring that the struggle remained etched in memory. And that was a struggle Pam Bondi was determined to win. If you hold the conviction that truth deserves to be heard, consider subscribing to the channel for more narratives that confront authority and advocate for justice. For the sole path to defeat is to avoid the struggle entirely.